Hey, y'all, it's Michelle with SLP Full Disclosure, and welcome to our podcast today. I'm really nervous about today's interview. He told me not to be nervous. We are joined by Patrick O'Connor, who is the president of AMN Schools Division. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michelle. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's not every day you get to interview your boss, so I'm a little bit nervous. So we're going to be talking about really AMN as a whole and just what that process looks like on the AMN side when we're securing those vendors and all of the things. So there's a lot that goes on the back end that we've never really talked about. We've always just talked about SLPs and connecting with your recruiters. But today I want you guys to learn a little bit more about AMN as a company. And we're going to learn about just really the travel industry. We're going to pick Pat's brain about how the industry has changed over the past 5 to 10 years, kind of what it looked like pre-COVID, post-COVID, and all of those things. And so, Pat, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited.
Yeah, happy to
All right. So
let's kick things off here.
yeah, let me tell you guys a little bit about Pat. Pat leads the strategy, growth, profitability, and delivery excellence of AMN Healthcare's K through 12 school business. Since joining AMN in July of 2011, Pat has overseen sales, recruitment, and operational teams to ensure compliant, scalable execution while maintaining high levels of customer satisfaction across school district partnerships nationwide. Pat brings more than 15 years of healthcare staffing experience, having spent his entire career with AMN Healthcare. He began as an account manager and progressed through multiple leadership roles across the medical and school staffing divisions. One of his key achievements includes leading the acquisition and successful integration of a competitor into AMN, after which the School Solutions Division experienced consecutive years of growth and continued upward momentum. Pat actively supports the Sandy Hook Promise in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, reflecting his commitment to supporting school safety and community well-being. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
All right, let's
thank you for
get
that.
started. First of all, I'm glad that I finally got to meet you and put a face to a name. I have heard your name since I have been with AMN, and it was so exciting to meet you and have you be with us today. So, when did AMN begin first staffing allied health professionals? Because it originally started as just nursing.
Yeah, just nursing, and really back in the early 90s is really when that kicked off. And I think Allied ultimately came in after that, also in the 90s, but it was more so a subset of what AMN was doing, right? Just in
Mhm.
that travel nurse space, and really when contract nursing started. But Allied has since grown, right? Since the 30 plus years since then, really it's almost neck and neck with our travel business right now, which is crazy to say. And I think when you hear Allied Health, like it makes up some of the school business that's here too, but really it's those acute settings, skilled nursing, outpatient, ambulatory settings, it's therapy, it's imaging, respiratory, laboratory professionals. So there's a lot that goes into Allied Health.
Mhm.
So I'm proud to be a part of that division within AMN.
That's exciting. I know I'm going to put this little plug in there, and I emailed Katie about this the other day. I have started watching The Pit, and I'm sure that you've been made aware of this. So I was watching The
My
Pit.
wife and I,
Yes, and in the second episode of the first season, they have a patient who needs an interpreter. I can't remember if it was a language interpreter, sign language, or what it was. But anyway, the little mobile device that they brought in had an AMN logo on
yeah,
it.
the green machine. That's what it's called
Yes.
over there,
I
and
love it.
that's
I
how
was so excited. I was like, "Oh my gosh," and I paused it, and I took a picture of it, and I sent it to everyone that I know. I was like, "Look, AMN is on The Pit." Super exciting. So, yes, very, AMN, I think because it stands for American Mobile Nursing, correct?
correct.
All right. And so they don't realize that we also staff so many allied health professionals. So, how have you seen the travel industry in general change over, let's say, the past 10 years?
I think it's been tremendous change. From really, you kind of went through my background, and really I started off just in the therapy space, to primarily really partnering with skilled nursing facilities, through that. But I think what's really taken off is just the overall reliance of some of our health systems to use vendors to help solve their workforce challenges, which AMN ultimately is, on there. And it got to a point where they wanted to use the vendors to not only staff their positions, but also coach them through the workforce challenges from a long-term perspective, right? So how can they solve for getting new graduates, permanent solutions in, And then also, how can they use a vendor to manage all of their vendors that they're working with to really fill their vacancies and help them really service their patients? And if it's a school district, right, where I'm at now, right, their students too. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of the things, especially during COVID, a lot more was asked of from the health systems and different facilities of AMN to really come through and of, other vendors in the industry. So it
Mhm.
has become, you know, an industry where I think from where it was previously
Mhm.
and now it's really more clinician led too. I think the competition has also increased quite a bit. And I think we're being challenged by our health systems to think short term as well as long term to provide cost savings. But then on the candidate side, it's even more competitive. From us as a large player in the space, candidates want the transparency. They want to feel like they are part of like they're working for a boutique staffing company, right? And ultimately they don't want to feel like they're just a contractor or another name, that's entering in for a 13-week assignment or school year, whatever it is too. So I think that that's where it's gone from kind of this plug and play kind of transactional model 10 years ago to now it's really, really more consultative and really more overarching from a solutions perspective.
What do you think led to these hospitals and medical settings and schools? I know your schools. What led to them needing to reach out to vendors? Why do you think there was such a staffing shortage? Was that something that came about because of COVID, or was that something that we were seeing pre-COVID?
I think even pre-COVID, right? I think COVID obviously put, tremendous pressure, obviously with the need for patient care and things like that. But even pre-COVID, you look at, the unemployment rates across, allied professionals, across nursing professionals. You look at just the amount of vacancies that are out there. And then, you couple that with we have a baby boomer population that is hitting that retirement age. Care is more needed more than ever across that. So I think it's in a ways, it's a perfect storm of just our professionals continuing to enter into the workspace. Do these hospitals have the time to recruit this talent, retain the talent that they currently have, with the challenge that they face there, and then also the need for patient care continues to rise, and it's only going to continue move forward here.
Yeah, and that was my next question. Where do you see the travel industry going in the next 10 years?
So I think really the embrace of technology has been something that has come on, and I think we're
Yeah.
all interested to see how AI is going to impact things.
Mhm.
You may even People may not even realize it unless they're in a health system. Like I think back to an example I recently had was my mother went through. She had a hip replacement surgery, and they live in the Raleigh Durham area, so that she had it done at Duke, and it was pretty much an in and out procedure.
Mhm.
She ended up staying the night, but she went the next day. And I remember just the discharge
Mhm.
process that we went through. And it really stood out to me where the last surgery I had was I had my appendix out when I was in high school. But
Mhm.
I remember the doctor coming in, talking me through it, and just the technology of that experience to what my mother went through. We had a nurse come in, drop off an iPad, and said, wait for someone to call you on it was Microsoft Teams, and my mom's getting discharged and receiving instructions from a nurse that's sitting in another state, letting her know what she needs to do over the next, few days and then coming weeks as well. So it was just really I was kind of taking a step back just from being there and seeing that like that's it, right? She got the same information, was able to get her questions answered through that kind of virtually, but it made the process much quicker. If she had to wait for a doctor to come by or a nurse to be available, right, it may have extended her stay in that hospital longer. I mean, ultimately, right, she was able to get those instructions much faster and back home, which is where she wanted to be after that. So I think that's an example of just the way the tech is going and how it's
Mhm.
implemented. You mentioned the interpretation software that we have that's on the pit. Obviously, throughout schools, we've seen teletherapy expand. So
Mhm.
that's another thing where we try to be on the forefront. We partner with a lot of companies through that Televate platform that we have for AI capabilities. So I think of, we partner with a company, NerdChat,
Mhm.
that is built in has an app within Intelivate and is able to really supplement our offering to students that would traditionally be using AAC devices. So it really gives that tool, and it's not just meant to be used by virtual candidates, but it's also a way to leverage AI for on-site, students that are there that would traditionally use these very expensive AAC devices that are clunky to carry around. Now they can pull up and have, image boards on their phone. Their parents can use it for free.
Right.
There's just the technology is just it's coming fast and furious. And
And it's coming faster than someone my age, Pat, can keep up with almost sometimes, I feel like. But, just thinking about the kids where I work right now,
mm,
I'm working virtually in a district in Northern California that if it weren't for AMN and staffing and the vendors that they have, these students would go without services. They would
absolutely.
not have speech and language services because of the large geographical area and just where they're located. They don't have professionals that are moving to that area. So when you start thinking about your Dallas, your Fort Worth, your, New York, your big metropolitan cities, there are a lot of people that live there. And you kind of have a draw of people that reside in those areas and can provide those services. But when you look at a district where I work, there's no one there to provide those services. And if it weren't for the virtual teletherapist, these students in this entire district would go without services. And I think you're right. Just the ability to access those services virtually. And I use the Televate platform daily with NairChat, and I absolutely love it. It makes my job so much easier. So
Access
I
to
know that.
equity is everything. I think that's the biggest thing. Just because someone's born or lives somewhere does not mean that they should not have access to the same type of services that
Right.
are available in those, larger metropolitan areas that you mentioned.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about what happens on the back end, what happens on your end of AMN before we ever get these contracts with these schools. I know you called it in our intro call, you called it an RFP,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what does that look like? Like, how are you guys going out and getting these school districts? How are you finding these school districts like the one that I work with? How did how did someone like AMN come to find them in Northern California and for them to say, "Hey, we need help." So what does that process look like?
So I think there's a few different ways that we go about it. So RFPs definitely play a part of it, and I'll touch on that. But we have a direct business development team, right, that sits within AMN, and they're actively reaching out to school districts. They partner closely with our recruitment team, and we have candidates that want to work with AMN, and we look to try and get them placed in their ideal locations too. Or they may want to work virtually, right? And we're proposing them as options to school districts too. So we go about it from a direct way, but a lot of the way that the sales process works in schools is the way that the funding for these positions comes in. It's public funding. So really, the property taxes that we all pay, and it varies state by state, but that ultimately ends up into what goes into the school's budget. And the school's budget, and you may, some listeners or folks may vote, on the budget that comes up, in their specific areas. But it includes funds that are allocated to vendors like AMN to staff these positions in these hard to fill locations, or just vacancies due to the unemployment rate where the school districts have not had success in there. So anytime that these school districts, right, they're using these public funds, it's really on them to use them responsibly. So
And
what
appropriately.
and appropriately, right? Like a lot of them are, in elected officials and things like that as we get on there on the board of these school districts, and
Mhm.
they want to ensure that these funds, right? And we're talking in some schools, it's hundreds of millions of dollars too. Some it's over $1 billion, but they're using them appropriately. So in some states it varies. But for the majority of large schools, because they're using public funds, they need to go out and ultimately show a competitive process, right? They're not just, partnering with this vendor because they know someone that works over there.
Mhm.
They need to go out and basically put out an announcement of, we are looking for partners for related services staffing within a school, and it is public. So it allows the opportunity for AMN or any other vendor that's out there to reply to these requests for proposals. So we send in a
Mhm.
proposal bid that outlines really our scope of services, what we're able to offer, and our pricing at the end of the day
Right.
too.
The number, because it's all about money. It's all about the bottom
I mean,
line.
it's the
Yeah.
budget. They wanna make sure that they can, secure the services. So in some of these, they're very, very competitive, but a school district operates, and I think that this is the way things have changed too, kind of going back to one of your other questions, is previously I think it was much easier to onboard vendors and possibly work directly But now just the scrutiny that is under a lot of these funds,
Mhm.
it is they want to narrow their vendor network. They're asking more of their vendors to be able to come up with creative solutions, but really going through that RFP process, it typically it's an annual process, but they then select their vendors based off, a lot of times it's written proposals. So they're making these connections and they're selecting these vendors based off kind of a written response too. So we also, we try to build the relationships, behind the scenes and things like that before these RFPs come about to really, show kind of the depth and breadth of what we're able to offer. But then they'll go through a review period, and then that usually can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, and in some cases even longer, depending upon how competitive it is or the size of the school district too. But then you get awarded or you don't. But if you are awarded, then you have the opportunity to work with that school directly. And those awards could last anywhere from, some cases it's 3 years, some cases it's 5 years, other cases it's year after year. But right, there could be hundreds of responses to these RFPs, and they may only select to work with 5 agencies or 10
Okay.
agencies. Some school districts may say, hey, we're going to award everyone, and this is how they choose to do business. So I think that that's important for the candidates that are listening, is to understand it's a very lengthy process to get into these school districts. And it's not as easy as just, one of our business development folks picking up the phone and saying, hey, we see that you have a permanent position posted online. We have a candidate that could, is interested in the area. They'd love to do, a travel contract with you before they convert over perm. They're ultimately tied to use the vendors that are approved and went through that competitive process. So, it's not as easy as if we have a candidate that's loyal to AMN, we may not be able to get into ABC district until they come out for RFP, and vice versa, right? If they're working with a company, or if you want to work with a specific company, but you want to be in this specific area, it's not as easy as necessarily just knocking on their door and saying, hey, we have someone and we can get you on this contract like that. And not to say that there's different areas that we can utilize and show that we went through a competitive process. It's kind of getting in the weeds here, but there's piggyback opportunities. So if there's the school district you're at in Northern California, we're an awarded vendor there, we could possibly take that award and say, to another school that's, let's say, maybe in Southern California, we could take that award and say, hey, we went through this process at this school district. We were selected. So then and purchasing departments may say, hey, that is sufficient enough. You've been vetted by, one of our peers within the state.
Mhm.
Because you were awarded, we can now bring you on. So there's different ways that we can kind of circumvent that RFP
Mhm.
process. But for the most part, that is the way in, and that is the way to retain, and that is the way to get kind of those contracts with school districts. So it's working with pseudo government, I would call it,
Yeah.
agents or government adjacent,
Mhm.
really.
Yeah. And the competition is brutal, right? I mean, how many staffing agencies do you think are out there? If you just had to guess.
Thousands,
Could you even guess? Yeah, thousands.
thousands.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. So you for our listeners, I think the point of this podcast today is to understand that AMN is a very reputable company, and we are vetting our districts just as much as the districts are vetting us. And there is a process that goes into this. So we talked on our intro call. Well, before I ask that question,
Yeah.
let me ask you this. How do you excuse me. How does AMN balance vendors and job openings? Because you can't have 1,000 jobs and 100 SLPs to fill it, and you can't have 1,000 SLPs and only 100 jobs. So how do you keep that balance?
So I think for us, it's really trying to be consultative with the schools, and also, right, our contracts and clients that we have across the other settings, to really what's the best time and route to fill their vacancies. So we have a lot of historical information, we have market data, we have things like that we try to share with, and I'll keep it specific to the school space because it's what I'm most familiar with at the moment. But we really try to coach and counsel our school districts to moving as early as possible within the full calendar year. So in January, we are talking to our customers, and even some cases earlier to the prior year, about the upcoming school. So the
I know
upcoming
I signed
school
my
year.
contract before Christmas this year to renew for next year.
And that is best case scenario, right?
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, right, our schools value, and if you go down to the parents, you go down to, right, I've talked with many, on site for visiting them, and throughout the years, it is the continuity. They do not want to see someone that is coming in that they have to retrain, re-onboard, and like they're working with a sensitive population, and you get close with these families, you get close with these students, you build relationships. They don't want it to be a revolving door of talent year after year. So that is, their number one priority. And I think from us as an agency, it's how can we continue to ensure that our candidates feel the same way? They want to return there,
Hmm.
year after year, because that's best case. It's easier for us to keep someone there, just as, we don't want someone who's moving around and doing all that. It's the happy path. But at the end of the day, I mentioned we've talked through the RFP process. Those
Hmm.
usually come out earliest is March, and then they really continue through August, depending upon
Hmm.
the seasonality. So in some cases, some schools may say, hey, I'm fiscally bound. I'm unable to make decisions until we have awarded our vendors for the upcoming school year, which may happen in May or June. That puts them at a competitive disadvantage for talent because one, you're
Right.
unable to keep your current folks on. Two, any seasoned, I'll call it school contractor or school professional, they're really looking to line up where they're going to be and have their assignment or right,
Mhm.
like you said, you signed it
That's me.
in December as early as possible. So they know there's no what if, there's no any of that. It is set in stone. And things could life happens, obviously. But
Right.
if you have that ability to have your future secured,
Hmm.
that is something you want to take advantage of. And I think that that's, across any industry
Right.
too, and just in life. But so for us, it's how do we coach and counsel our school districts to move as early as possible? Because not only is
Hmm.
that going to give them the best time, but let's say the candidate doesn't want to return, or they may have folks that are going to be out on maternity leave, or maybe they have a perm person that's going to be retiring, and they don't know how they're going to backfill that vacancy. Right? At the very
Right.
least, if you know some of these things, it gives you the longest amount of runway to
Right.
find someone, right? And ensure
Right.
that those students are seen and the services remain on track and there's no risk. But if we have schools that wait till the summertime, candidates want to enjoy their summer break.
Yeah. They don't
They
want to be
don't they
looking
don't
for a
want to
job.
be, but let's say
Panicked.
we have someone that is going to be traveling in, right? That amount of runway gives us the time to get them licensed in the area, credentialed for their assignment.
And
All the
find them a
things that
place to
come in.
live.
Yeah, from the
Yeah. They have
onboarding,
to find a
finding,
place
yeah,
to live.
exactly. So
Yeah.
so that's the other thing where if you're trying to do this between if it's in June or July and that start date, typically it's rolling throughout August and a little bit later in the Northeast, but then you're crunched for time. And your
Hmm.
supply pool goes from very large to very small
Very small.
within a matter of months. So that's really how we try to be forward thinking, proactive with our schools. And like I said, we use all the historical data and information to really give them a better picture of how they can be successful. So if there's 1,000 vacancies and there's only 100 candidates, pay may be a factor, right? Or where do their rates stack up within the market? And they can use that information to go to their board, go to the
Right.
decision makers and powers that be
Right.
and say, hey, if this is, we need to have this position filled, this is what other school districts in our area or state or nationwide are offering. We're nowhere near that. Or maybe
Right.
it's vice versa, right? And we can go
Right.
to them and say, you can actually get a candidate, we can provide cost savings, et cetera. So there's a number of ways that we try to, like I said, be as consultative as we can and really partner with our schools and our clients at AMN.
Right. And I can only speak from my experience with AMN. It has been, I couldn't imagine working for, and I've said this before, I couldn't imagine working for another company other than AMN. It has been, and people ask me, how did you find AMN? And it was just luck of the draw. I just got lucky with what I think is the best company and the best
Yeah, I mean, we
contracting
love to hear
agency
that.
out
I
there.
mean, I've been
Yeah.
here, you mentioned it, right? Like 15 years,
Hmm.
really first job out of school. And I've stuck around right through different
Hmm.
acquisitions, all that. And for me, it's the people, it's the passion for what we do every day, the
It's the
students that we serve.
personalization.
It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. It's knowing that I think it's that initial relationship with your recruiter, but then also just that it's a feeling, like you said earlier, you said something of boutique agency.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what AMN is. But we are a very large staffing agency, but it's very personal. And your recruiter knows you, you know your recruiter, and you know your members on your team. You know that. So I love AMN, and I've said it before. And I'm not just saying that because you are who you are. So let's talk about, I know we mentioned this in our intro call,
Yeah.
and I'm going to put you on the spot here about because my daughter is a teacher, and I asked you about staffing teachers. That's something that we don't currently do. And I also asked you about the possibility of staffing internationally. So let's talk about if we were to start staffing teachers, what is that process? How hard is it to just to pull in another area of professionalism here? And because we do, I mean, we do everything right now in the allied health and in the medical setting.
So I think
When are
it's
we going to be able to get my daughter a job?
So I think at AMN, like we're always looking, you look across, right? Allied nursing, we talked about the interpretation. We're always
Hmm.
looking for growth, which is another thing that I think is just tremendous about the company. So specifically within schools, there's definitely a lot of avenues that we can get into. And I think, we've only been really kind of in the school space for the past 6 years, since that acquisition that we called out. But, we've grown just really almost 40% our total market share within that time frame. And that's really been across, right, therapy, some school psychology, behavioral health's an area that continues to be a focus for us as well with the demand there. But there's also, you mentioned, there's general teaching, substitute teaching, there's
Special
some
ed teachers,
special ed teachers.
that's where I see a big need.
And I think, we definitely keep our finger on the pulse as far as like what is the market for that? What is the opportunity? What does the market look like from a growth perspective over the next 10 years? But for us, it's right, it's not in our wheelhouse. So we need to do, a lot of research. We have a regulatory team that looks through like what would it take to staff these individuals from a
Mhm.
license standpoint? How do we build it out in our systems? How do we track, the different certifications and things like that? We're not accustomed to. And then I think, and then what's needed within a school, because that's different than what's needed, across a health system also. And I think that also translates into the international space. We do that in the nursing world today, but there's a lot of logistics that go behind it.
Yeah,
And I'm not
and a lot of legal issues, I would imagine.
legals, visas, and a lot of balls in the air that, our division over there really juggles very, very nicely. And, you know, it's something that it could be a challenge, right? Will school districts be acceptable to foreign trained, right? That's something that we haven't seen. We haven't, but would love to offer it as a possible solution. But really, these things need to be researched, vetted, and ultimately, right, there needs to be that opportunity. But if you ask me, I would want to have my hands in every pot possible, right, to
I
offer
love that.
offer solutions to
Yeah,
schools, whether they're in a remote area or a metropolitan area. So it's just more so. It's not as easy as just, us putting down and responding to an RFP and getting awarded to we really
yeah,
have to be able to deliver
right,
on what we're proposing to the clients as well as the candidates that we're going to go out and partner with as well.
yeah. All right, Pat, it's been great. I could probably ask you 100 more
Yeah,
questions,
keep
but
going.
I'm not gonna do that.
All right.
So, why do you think it is important for SLPs who are listening to this podcast? Because our primary audience is new grads, the SLP graduate students, because they are all into podcasts. Those that are listening that are interested in travel, why is it important for them to really research the company? Because, like you said, there are thousands of staffing agencies out there. Why should they really put forth that effort on the front end to research the company that they're going to be working for?
I think that the biggest thing is really understanding what the company is able to offer.
Mhm.
And a lot of that, a lot, you said it before, your relationship with your recruiter means a lot, right? And being loyal
Mhm.
to someone who is an advocate for you, who ultimately becomes a friend, right? And someone that
Right.
you trust to kind of guide you through your career, but really look at what the agency at their foundation is able to offer. I would look at their experience in the industry. I would look at their total benefits package, comparatively, because just because you see a job posting that says, the pay is astronomical does
Mhm.
not mean that that is going to be the best experience for you.
Right.
And I think that that's where people get lost in that. But the
Mhm.
benefits that I'll speak for AMN. We offer our candidates, we have, reimbursements annually, things of that nature. And really understanding, right, if your goal is to work remotely, right? Like that is something that we can do. If your goal is to work in various settings, we talked about, we mentioned the SLPs on that are listening, right? Like you could work in a school district, you can work in a hospital, you can work in a pediatric clinic, you can work in a
Nursing
skilled
home.
nursing home. There's that flexibility where you can really get a lot of experience under your belt quickly. And they go through clinical rotations and things like that before they come out. But it's one of those where you can really continue that on a contract perspective and see the world, right? You see different settings and ultimately find out where you want to be too. So I think like that is an area where if there's any questions or any doubts, even just about travel or things like I would just encourage anyone to reach out and talk to one of our recruiters who could, obviously, guide them through what AMN can offer and our contracts. But I think they can also tell them about the industry and what they've seen. We have a tremendous tenured group that can really guide them and be that
Yeah.
Sherpa for them through
Right.
this industry. Yeah.
Because I believe AMN is the best. I truly do. And I think that also reaching out to a recruiter to find out more about what AMN is as a company and what they offer, like you said, but also asking the recruiter to connect you with clinicians like myself who have been working for AMN. I've been through several contracts with AMN. I was on a travel contract. Now I'm doing virtual. Talking to those clinicians, we have Claudia that did her clinical fellowship year. She would be an amazing source of information for anyone listening. So I think just researching the company that you're going to be working for, like Pat said, finding out what that benefits package is, but also finding out who that company is at its core,
Yeah.
and just knowing who
Does it
you are.
align with you with
Yeah,
the values and where you want to be? I think that is
right.
that is
Yeah. Pat, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been amazing. And I'm so glad I finally got to put a face to a name and meet you.
yeah,
So
likewise.
maybe we will have you back on the podcast soon. But for today, thank you guys for joining, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Thank you for tuning in to SLP Full Disclosure. You can learn more about this episode and our show on our website at amnhealthcare.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find show updates and SLP opportunities on our Instagram at AMN Allied. Special thanks to AMN Healthcare for making this show possible. See y'all next time.